All right, so we've got the session has gone live, and for those of you that are starting to join us, welcome. Hi, Shirley. It's great to have you here with us, and we're excited today to be chatting to Andrew Jones, who's the Executive Director at Climate Interactive. But we'll wait for a few more people to join us. I may just mention to you, Shirley, that obviously this is what is known as a social audio event, and we really encourage, for those of you in the audience, if you have questions, to raise your hand, and I will invite you up onto the stage, and we can have a conversation with Drew on all the topics that we are intending to cover today. So we have a few things that we want to discuss that I have sort of penciled in, but remember, this is a social audio event which is all about you as an audience. And I encourage you, raise your hand, come up onto stage, share your insights or ask your questions, whichever it is that you would like to do. So I think, for us to sort of get the conversation going, as I said, Andrew Jones is the Executive Director at Climate Interactive. And Drew, I think maybe the best place to start this conversation is to ask you how you got to Climate Interactive. What's the history behind all this?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation and welcoming me and my team here. And it's great to see people arriving. I can see folks showing up here on the LinkedIn page. Really just thinking about how this En-ROADS climate simulator helps improve climate literacy, something we need so badly in the world right now. And probably maybe even before my origin story, I should just say a few words about what this is that we're offering to the world to address climate literacy. This computer simulation that, Peter, you're using, that I'm using, that we've got 1,500 facilitators around the world using. And if you haven't seen it yet, it is a global climate model that is much more engaging, fun, and kind of flexible than the normal ones that you see showing up in scientific studies. It is online, free, 17 languages, being used by school kids, senators here in the US, educators from 100 countries. And it's a fast way to see all the things that we can do to address this climate challenge. I'll put a link in the site here in the comments in a minute, but it's basically you asked about how I got to this work. We're a team of 12 people. It grew out of MIT, but the way I got into it was when I was a student in college. I went to a Dartmouth College here in the United States, and I was frustrated by what was going on with landfills and waste, and decided that recycling wasn't as powerful as reducing our use of things. And I was sick that the only approach that I knew was to tell people to use less stuff. Peter, I don't know if you've ever been that person, but that judgy kind of, why don't you use less stuff, kind of shaming and blaming. So what I did was I organized 120 fellow students and faculty, including my mentor, Danella Meadows, a MacArthur Genius Award winner faculty member. We carried our trash for a week in plastic bags, 1989, walked around and learned a lot about how to reduce our use of stuff. You can imagine all the innovation that happened when suddenly you want to use less pizza boxes and beer cans and waste paper and newspapers and beer cans and beer bottles. We figured out how to drink beer by the keg was the big innovation there in college for all of us. And my mentor, Dana Meadows, pulled me aside and said, this is a simulation. This gives people a visceral experience of the long-term delayed implications of their actions. And that's called a simulation. It changes behavior. And ever since, I've been trying to recreate that experience of a simulation that changes behavior at a deep level. And Peter, I hope you've seen that with En-ROADS. When you show it to someone and they see if we had a carbon price in energy efficiency and we cut methane emissions and deforestation, how much better the world could be. How it changes behavior. Have you seen that yet, Peter? You've shown this to folks. What do you see as the light bulb that goes off in people's heads when they experience a simulation?
Okay, so thank you for the question, and this is a good place for me to talk a little bit about how I arrived
Yeah,
to meet you and your team. So, for everybody that's joining the conversation, we're having a conversation today around how the En-ROADS climate simulator can help improve climate literacy. Andrew Jones is the executive director of Climate Interactive, the folks who support and created this simulator, and we're gonna get into that in a little bit more detail. So just to get back to how I ran across Climate Interactive and the simulator, at Future Work IQ, what we do is we help leadership teams get their heads around global megatrends that are maybe 3 or 5 years a little bit into the future and prepare for those. One of the things that we clearly saw, I think this must have been around about 2018, thereabouts, was that the situation around the climate is going to progressively get more dire. And as a
yeah,
result of that, what's going to happen is obviously people are going to be impacted by the physical events related to extreme weather, etc. But also
yeah,
that governments were going to begin to put in regulations that will have impacts on businesses. So what I was looking for, especially after the pandemic had just finished, I was looking for a tool that we could use in what we call our climate literacy workshops. And that's in
yeah,
searching for something like that. That's when I ran across yourselves and the En-ROADS simulator. So to get to
yeah,
your question about the impact this has, one of the things that happens automatically that I've experienced with the workshops that we've led using the En-ROADS simulator is that people get to understand that there is not one thing that will fix the problem that we face. There's a whole host of things that we need to do. And that
right.
realization, when they actually physically experience that, because as you know, with the simulator, when you do these workshops, what you actually do is move those sliders along, and people get to guess what impact that's going to have on the temperature and on emissions, etc. And when they see that what they thought was going to be a huge impact is not, then the questions begin happening. You can literally see it with
Yeah,
people. They start saying, "Oh
yeah,
my word! I thought this would have a big impact, but it's not." So
yeah.
that's been our experience.
Yeah, the light bulbs really go off when people learn for themselves. And the principle of how we came to this grew out of this quote from my mentor at MIT, John Sturman, who said, research shows that showing people research doesn't work. And we've showed people research for so long. Here's a graph. If we got emissions down, we'd do a lot better. If emissions go up, well, it's terrible. Here's the graph. Doesn't sink in ways that people can take action. So, what we need to do and what we've done is make this an interactive experience of asking questions, seeing scenarios, envisioning the future in a social experience, talking to other people, peers, where you're much more open to changing your mind about things when supported by your peer group. All the research is showing that this is the setting where people are actually open to changing minds because of that idea of making it much more interactive.
So Drew, just high level, the simulator. I think, what is it, about 18 policies, or is there more that you can actually
Yeah.
manipulate to try and create a scenario where we're well below 2 degrees?
Yeah, they're 18 on the front for the simple version, but if you open up and go underneath, and when anyone who's gone to the page, you can click on a link and go look at the simulator, you'll see these three dots around many of the solutions. That opens up another 30 different policies or nuances to the policy underneath. Um, Carbon pricing and energy efficiency and deforestation and forests and ag and carbon removal. and coal, oil, gas, population, all of those.
So I wanted to just ask you, Drew, from your experience, if given what needs to happen on a global scale, what we need to do as a global community to basically change the entire system that we're in, what role do you think, from your experience and what you've seen with the years that you've been doing this, what role does climate literacy play in this whole equation of translating into action?
Yeah, yeah. Climate literacy, I see this kind of engagement doing three big things. The first is just engagement at all, getting people talking about, curious about, and uh, engaged in this issue and creating a better world. The second is making the distinction between high leverage actions and low leverage actions. Right now, there are a lot of policies that are being proposed that don't help that much, that will be distractions. Our president here in the United States 5 years ago proposed uh, a trillion trees, for example. We should plant trees. However, we've analyzed it and it's not a significant climate solution. And the world needs to know that. The biggest things to address climate change will keep coal, oil, and gas in the ground in the next 10 or 15 years. Those are the highest leverage things, along with cutting deforestation and methane. So the distinction between high leverage and low leverage. And the third is to create a vision of success, of possibility, of having us all really get the truth that it's possible to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, to create a much better future. Engagement, high leverage, low leverage distinctions, and this idea of a vision. That's what I really think the promise of boosting climate literacy is.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So for those of you again that have just joined us in the conversation while we've been talking about this, remember this is a social audio experience, and I really encourage you, if you would like to join us for a conversation around this topic, or you would like to ask Andrew a question related to the simulator, you're more than welcome to raise your hands. Perhaps at this point it would be a good idea if you could just give me, for those of you that are in the audience, just give me a thumbs up. Have you actually seen the simulator, or have you interacted with it? It'll be interesting to see how many that are here listening to the conversation have actually experienced the simulator. Uh, Drew, while we're talking about the simulator, I see Lisa has. While we're talking about the simulator, can you just perhaps give a little bit of background? So, what is the simulator based on? I mean, what is like behind the simulator and those policies that you see on the front of the simulator?
Yeah, the simulator it's a mathematical model using a method called system dynamics, which is a method that grew out of MIT in the 1950s. That's what I studied, and my co-modeler, John Sturman out of MIT, is the head of that department there at MIT. It's out of the Sloan School of Management. So it grows out of the business school to complement the big disaggregated simulations that you probably see in major scientific studies. And it is 16,000 equations. It's a high order nonlinear differential equation model, if there are engineers and modelers out there. And it was built using this method, but really calibrated against the large models. So what we did is we said we wanted to run fast, be accessible and transparent, but produce results that are consistent with the huge models that'll take several days to run. We also publish all the equations in a 450-page guide on our website, so anybody can see what's in it. And many of the assumptions are changeable. You can go under assumptions and sensitivities and imagine a world with different parameters in it. So we try to be very transparent about it and bring the complexity of these big models to decision makers, students, policymakers. We showed it to 128 members of Congress. over the last 2 years before the passage of this bill here in the United States. So that's a little bit behind it.
Great. So that's really interesting. I wanna explore just your insights around this model inside a business setting. So I want you
Yeah,
to imagine a scenario, because I mean obviously this is a global model, right? So when you interact with the levers on the front of the model, what you're actually looking at here is it's global, right? It doesn't relate to a specific country or a small business. However, what I want to just check with you is from your experience in presenting this to businesses, what is one of the best ways to transition from the global picture, which the model actually creates,
yeah.
to one which relates to a specific business that is actually looking at this as a climate literacy exercise and what they need to do
Yeah.
next?
The principle is to think global, act business, act local, act industry. And it works so well because the model reveals systems principles about the energy transition, about the climate crisis, about the solutions that really are applicable at a variety of scales, from a business to a community, a state, a country. So we ran this at HSBC Bank. And when I trained somebody there, Andrew Greenspan, he went on to run workshops for 2,600 bankers at HSBC. We're about to do similar things with Wells Fargo out of Climate Interactive, and our partners are doing at MIT, are running similar events soon for Accenture. And I've done a lot of workshops for dozens of businesses in the oil industry, gas industry, other banks. What they tend to do is step back and think globally about what is the challenge? How is it showing up? What needs to happen in around the world? And then roll up their sleeves and say, what do we work on? At HSBC, the big question is, do we continue to fund coal around the world? Do we need to fully divest and not fund any more coal? Do we need to pull out of that? And so thinking globally about the role of coal, the growth in it, the possibility for accelerated retirement of capacity, the role of electrification and energy efficiency informed a much better discussion between the 20 people around the table about what they were going to do next. Think global, act industry. I'm curious, Peter, your experience, because you've had similar uh, challenges of making that transition. Do you find that they're able to do that, make that transition over global to a business? How is that going?
So I must tell you, my experience has been that, we do have the global conversation so that people, as you've correctly said, that people can now look and see, what is it going to take for us as a global business community to create results that we need to see around what we need to do. So that when folk understand that, what we often then do is we put aside the simulator. And when I say
Yeah,
put aside, I mean it's there, but then the conversation starts around, what is your exposure to fossil fuels? In other words,
mm-hmm.
if you have a look at your business right now, what is your exposure to it? I mean, how do you power the buildings you're in? Um, are you making people commute to an office? How are those people commuting? What
Yeah,
in what are they using fossil fuel driven vehicles? Is there something that you can do about those things? What about if you own the building? What about changing the energy to renewable energy? Can you put solar up? Can you bring batteries in? So those conversations definitely happen. So it's like you say, you look at the global picture, but then you bring it down. You say, okay, let's imagine we were a country. Let's imagine our business was a country.
right,
What could we do, as a
right.
group to decouple from fossil fuels? Because at the end of the day, that really is the exercise. It's to decouple from fossil fuels, which in essence prevents the burning of them, which is actually about keeping them in the ground. So that's really been my experience. Just to mention again for those listening, please, if you want to join us, if you have any questions, do raise your hand, come up onto stage, and we can hear your thoughts on the conversation that we're having at the moment. Drew, I want to ask you I want to go to Climate Interactive. Um, what is the big mission at Climate Interactive? I know you're a team of I think you said 12. What do you know
Yeah.
if you have to look sort of like a couple of years, 1 or 2 years down the line, what is your vision for Climate Interactive?
Yeah, I love sharing the big picture, like that our vision is of a world where greenhouse gas emissions are falling rapidly with equitable policies. And it's those two things together of climate results measured with something really concrete, the pollution that causes climate change, greenhouse gas emissions falling rapidly, and bringing in equity, because we don't want to just solve the climate crisis and make new problems for other people and people today. So those two things together, and of course, the way we do it is to create and share the tools that drive that equitable and effective climate action. What we see is really spreading this tool and all of its power around the world. We've had such big results here in the United States where we're based, but the future emissions are going to be in China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, these growing economies. And we really want to empower people to use these tools in those parts of the world. We also, so that's the diffusion part. The other is that we know there are new technologies and new scientific questions that need to get involved, getting included in En-ROADS. Hydrogen is not in there and we're improving it. We're going to be digging more into methane. We don't do such a good job and the science is changing so fast. We want to understand methane better and so many of the impacts that are showing up so quickly. When we think of Pakistan, a third of Pakistan underwater this last week and 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we want to have more modeling and understanding of drought and desertification and flooding for Pakistan, and health impacts and equity impacts. So there's so much that we want to bring to our communicators, our En-ROADS climate ambassadors like you and others who are out there. Those are the two big areas, diffusion and improvement of this tool. We also have some technical things up our sleeves. We now have a prototype of the model working on a phone really well, finally. So there's some new innovations that we're working on in our research and development office.
So before we talk about climate ambassadors, because I think this is something that everybody needs to know about. But before we do that, can I just ask you, the simulator, how often does the data and everything on the back end of the simulator get updated? In other words, how accurate is this?
We have to do releases every month. So first week of every month, if you go to that simulator and you click on the support page and the updates, you'll see every month something changing because the science is changing so fast. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, came out with the report that we call AR6 that has a lot of new findings about the science of climate change. So we have to keep the model up to date with that every month. And we're also planning a big release in January where we're going to add a lot more about land and ag and growth and electrification. So every 6 months or so is a big release, but every month we got to change and tweak a little something. Like the UN just came out with new estimates of population. Good news, population isn't growing as much as they thought. So out by 2100, it's going to be a little bit lower. That's reflected in the model.
Right. Okay. So that's, for everybody that's using it, and this is one of the things that excited me, when I looked at the simulator and what you and the team have available for us, is that it is as up to date as you can get, which is really powerful because, like you correctly say, the science is progressing. We're beginning to see things that happen sooner than expected, and all that stuff is brought into the simulator so that at least when you are presenting this and when you are discussing it, you can be sure that you have the up-to-date version of where we are at the moment as a global community. So,
Absolutely.
for those of you that are listening, and if you've been to climateinteractive.org, you'll actually see that the organization, Drew and his team, they offer an En-ROADS ambassador program. And what this does is it really teaches you everything that you need to know to be able to present the simulator, with as much knowledge as you need. And I want to say, Drew and your team, you guys have done a fantastic job. The 8-week program that I attended was extremely instructive. It helped someone who's not a climate scientist, which is, in my case, I'm not, but it's helped me to have this tool that I can trust, and with the training that you provide around that, to be able to present this in an authoritative way, to be able to share the current information with people. So I want to ask you, talk a little bit about the ambassador training program. What's that all about, just from your perspective?
Yeah, the training program and the ambassadors is the vision that people can use a powerful tool like this to get the results they really want and build up their own career and power in the world. It is remarkable how much more airtime and access you get with a MIT simulator in your hip pocket than just showing up at a conference or in a meeting or to try to get people to pull together. My colleague Ellie Johnston was going to a Climate Action Network summit, I remember, and I noticed that they would have panels, and they bring people up on the panel, and each person spoke for 3 minutes, say 5 times for 15 minutes. But when they invited her, they said, here's an hour and a half for you to frame the conversation with En-ROADS. And for a person 30 at the time, getting an hour and a half with 100 of her colleagues, just a remarkable access and ability to shape the conversation as you like. So the training program teaches you how to do that. We shot 65 5 to 10 minute videos. You don't have to watch all of them, but they're short and sweet. 35 little quizzes to keep you engaged, and we have meetups and some other videos that teach you to facilitate a workshop that engages others. And once you do that and run a couple events, you can become a En-ROADS Climate Ambassador. We have 525 in over 80 countries, in 15 languages, who are out there engaging others towards the climate results that they really want to see. So that's the idea of the ambassadors. And Peter, you've got to go through this and then also engage some of the very interesting colleagues from around the world. I see you on our Discord sharing your thoughts with others and meeting people from the other side of the world who are doing similar work towards shared goals.
Drew, yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that are looking at doing that program, I highly recommend it. And also there is a community that Climate Interactive has created around the En-ROADS simulator, and it is a robust community that has people from all over the world, as Drew mentioned, and it's a good place to bounce ideas off each other. But I wanted to just go back to, while we're talking about the ambassadors, I want to go back to HSBC, that example. And by the way, what I'm going to do, Climate Interactive and a couple of people associated with the HSBC actually published a sort of a research paper, if I'm not mistaken, Drew.
Right.
That paper I will actually put into the comments section of the event, so that for those of you that are attending will be able to actually go and have a look at that case study. But I wanted to ask you, with HSBC, how did they eventually start using ambassadors? Because if I can remember correctly, when I read the story, they found that because of the scale of what they needed to do and the speed at which they needed to do it, they realized that they wouldn't be able to do this themselves. Is that correct?
I think they mostly used a small team within HSBC
Okay.
who were ambassadors who we trained, but it was really a point person and then 2 or 3 others who really helped. But It really required translation into the way that people in the financial services industry think about climate, and in particular risk and physical risk and transition risk. So they really needed internal people. So they brought people through the program, and then that's what the group that went out to the 2,600 around the world.
100%.
Yeah,
I've got that. Okay. So now I
yeah,
understand that piece of the puzzle. So the way I've been also seeing from my use of the En-ROADS simulator in the workshops that we do, sometimes companies don't have the manpower or the time necessarily to send someone to become an ambassador, in which case they can just bring an ambassador in from outside the organization to present a workshop or a game. That's what I've been seeing happen, and that just reminded me of one thing. So the simulator can be used in a workshop setting, but there's also a game. Talk to me a little bit about
oh
that.
yeah, yeah. So and I'm putting into the comments for in the LinkedIn page that list of ambassadors for folks who do want to find one. And um, the game version we call the Climate Action Simulation, and uh, I invented it out of my classes where I teach MBA students. Originally, just it's so boring for many folks to just sit and look at a computer model and talk. They want something more lively. They want something that taps into feeling, emotion, and the drama of the big global debate about what we do about this big challenge. So what I did was broke up the class into stakeholder groups where I said, I am Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and I'm making a simulated summit, which is an emergency climate meeting. I'm saying here, I want to invite Rex Tillerson, who is the former head of Exxon, running a group which is the fossil fuel industry, conventional energy, and also Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and Elon Musk, with clean energy, and people representing food, land, and ag, and China. Xi Jinping is there. 8 different stakeholder groups, and they get a piece of paper that says, here are your goals, here are what you want to advocate for. And then we have a big negotiation where people debate and fight and protest and form coalitions. It's been run hundreds of times around the world, and it's a really powerful way, particularly for people who aren't so literate yet about the climate issue and wouldn't know what to propose if I just showed the simulator. Instead, it gives them a voice and a character to use that draws them into this debate. So when then someone proposes, oh, I want to electrify transportation, then we run that scenario in the simulator and they learn what would the impact be. And they learn, as you mentioned earlier, Peter, it's no silver bullet, but it does help, particularly if, in this case, you complement it with renewable energy and zero carbon energy. So you get to learn systems principles in a very dramatic way where stuff happens that is unforgettable. Like one time I turned around, went back to the place where I was projecting the simulation, and my computer was gone. And I really thought someone had snuck into this business, to this conference room, and stolen my computer. I was really upset until I realized a group of activists who were led by Greta Thunberg, who were sitting on the floor and didn't feel they had enough power, did this protest move, and they stole my computer. They said, we will not return the laptop until we get a carbon price of $100 a ton. And everybody was upset, and it just created this dramatic moment that was hilarious on reflection, but really brought out some of the drama of what's going on internationally as we try to think about solutions to this challenge.
So that's such an interesting story, and something I'm sure you won't forget in a hurry. So for everybody for everybody that's listening, this simulator, I believe, is one of the world's most powerful tools to help people with their climate literacy. And there's 2 ways that you can experience this. One is with in a workshop format. and the other is this game that Drew just explained. And both of them are extremely powerful, because if you and your team want to get yourselves upskilled so that you can talk authoritatively about the climate situation and what needs to happen inside your organization, the workshop or the game is a powerful way to experience that in a fun, interactive process. The climate conversation can get very technical. For those of you that have ever tried to consume an IPCC report, which is about 3,000 pages or so, of course that is essential if you really want the background. But the simulator with the workshop and the game, what that does is it just makes it understandable, easy to get your head around. And then I know you've always spoken about this, Drew, that the objective is to have people leave the workshop or the game with the model almost embedded in their brain, right?
Yeah.
So that they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, just talk a little bit about that, because I want to tell you, for me, that's in fact what's happened. If I take my own personal experience, I don't need the simulator for me to be able to make judgment calls or understand the news when you see things happening.
Yeah. The principle here is that all decisions are made with models. All decisions are made with models. It's just the models that are between our ears. We call them mental models. It is our understanding of how the system works. If I asked you right now, if we had much more energy efficiency in buildings and industry, insulation and motors and appliances and all that, how much do you think that would help the climate? And you think for a second, you are running your mental model. And the purpose of this whole effort is to complement that, and with a mathematical model that is just more grounded in how the world really works and has been proven to be better at simulating the future than our mental models. So the idea is to play with it and run the computer model enough such that your mental model improves, that you have a better gut feel and better mental math about how much different things help, how they interact with other things in the system, and what's needed to get to our goals. That's the principle of improving our mental models. So, Peter, when you say, I don't use the model or need it as much, that is the goal. We don't want people going to this tool to simulate things. We want them to improve the model they use 99% of the time, the one between their ears.
which is, if you think about it, what climate literacy is all about. And
Exactly.
so, this tool, as I've said repeatedly now, is such a powerful way to upskill people with their literacy, so that, my experience has just been with in organizations. If we take what happened with the pandemic, if an entire team was not upskilled when it comes to their digital literacy and their digital communication, etc., if an entire team is not upskilled, it's very difficult to work in a certain way. And so too with climate literacy inside an organization. If it's just confined to the sustainability department, or maybe the sustainability department and a few people in the leadership team, that is not as effective as when you have an entire organization or an entire team.
Absolutely.
With this model like embedded, and they now can understand that everything that they do on a daily basis can have an impact, and what impact is high leverage and what is low leverage.
Absolutely. And Peter, I'm noticing Stephen Tanner has his hand up.
Yeah.
And then someone after him. I wonder, you asked before, is it time to go there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to bring up Stephen, and there we go. And Hajdeep. Great. So Stephen, go ahead, unmute yourself and fire away. Okay, I can't unmute you, Stephen. So you have to do that yourself.
Okay.
Oh, there we
hear
go.
me now?
Got you. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it's the right time to put my hand up, but hopefully it will be. So my background is in corporate real estate, and
Yeah.
I started a business 20 years ago that was primarily kind of aimed at going back to the point you made at the start, Andrew, about wasting materials. I saw for days, weeks, months, years wasted materials and resources in the construction industry, particularly office fit outs. But I won't bore you with that because it's quite a long story. But the one thing which I'm focusing on at the moment with the business and the people we're talking to, which I think is, I'd just be interested to see what your kind of take on it was. And that is that over the last 2 years, there's been this huge movement towards flexible. Well, there was a massive movement towards flexible working anyway, but working from home specifically. And the fact that you now have a real myriad of people who want to work at home, can work at home, can't work at home. When they work at home, they're working in buildings that could very well be incredibly badly insulated. So you've got businesses that are trying to reduce office space and divest themselves of cost and CO2, GHG emissions and stuff. And you've got people who are working at home now who are working in a complete uncontrollable sort of situations, some of whom may want to go back to work soon because the cost of heating their houses is going to be so high that it'll be cheaper to go back to the office and work at home. So I'd just be intrigued to know how. And by the way, I should apologise. I haven't seen the simulator, but I certainly will do after this call. But I just think it's such an interesting and really challenging kind of moving target right now. It's a really difficult one to tie down.
Thank you, Stephen. And I see, because we're on LinkedIn, I see, you're part of that industry with Office Pod and working in that space. So it's a really big. It's a big. When we think about it in the context of how this contributes and addresses climate, it's this mix of, boy, can we cut transportation energy use because people aren't having to commute as much, and the promise of that and the possibilities for cutting that kind of those kind of emissions and energy use. And then the other side of it, which is what is going on with the energy use in data servers and how much is required in order to support all the home offices that are out there. How do those two things overall balance out? And I'll just come back to the main message. Like, the highest leverage thing for all of us to think about will be being part of the collective action towards standing up to the fossil fuel industry. And so there's a lot that we can do with our personal behavior and important trends like this, which will be dwarfed by whether the world gets serious about the global movement against fossil fuels, which I know is little to do with Office Pod in that area, but that's how I tend to think about it as someone who's doing a lot of the math on how to address climate.
Right.
And I see Harsh and Deep, maybe, go ahead.
No, I was just interested because I saw a white paper that was written. I think it was a collaborative kind of effort. There's a company called EcoAct, and they had wrote a white paper that it was sort of sponsored by NatWest Bank and I think it was Lloyds Bank here in the UK. And you mentioned HSBC, because the thing that they were talking about was that for greenhouse gas emissions, from the point of view of protocols and measuring emissions for an organisation, people working at home are currently not necessarily, they don't have to be included in the calculation. And they're making the point, basically, it's a very high level kind of overview point within this white paper, that actually it's an area of an organisation's profile, CO2 profile, that's almost impossible to control or influence. How do you get people working at home to reduce their CO2 emissions? Do you just encourage them to insulate their houses more? Do you get them to, it's just I just think there's a whole new kind of arena there that needs to be addressed, because you will. I'm convinced that it will be better for the climate if people were not, if they didn't travel to their central office as often as they would do or normally do. But at the same time, you got people working in houses and apartments where the insulation is abominable.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well said.
Anyway,
Thank you.
it's just interesting. I think it's a fascinating. I will look at your simulator.
Before we hop over to Hajdeep, I just want to mention to you, Stephen, that you may find this quite interesting. The International Energy Agency, as a result of the energy crisis in Europe at the moment, has published several studies that they've done. And one of the things that they do have recommended to governments is to encourage employers to let people work from home at least 3 days a week. They estimate that if that was done, it would save about 500,000 barrels of oil being burnt every day, just on the commute side. But interestingly, in their research, they actually published some data that even despite maybe the heating inefficiencies at home, that most people would save about 35 euros a month because of that 3-day window that they have. But what we can do is I can actually get the link of that to you, which I'm sure you'll find quite interesting.
Perfect. Okay, that's really useful. Thank you, Peter.
Great.
Thank you.
Hajdeep, you've been waiting patiently. Over to you.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Andrew. It is a very nice conversation going on here. I just have a question about how far do you think it will take this simulator to be used in conventional research rather than a tool to use to teach common folks about climate literacy and all?
Yeah. Thank you, Harshdeep. How long do I think it'll take for this to be used in conventional research?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, our purpose, like the reason we built it and designed it, is not for that goal. It can be used there, but there's so many simulators in that space that are used really well. We built a simulator to improve the mental models, the understanding in what we call decision makers. And decision makers are in government and business, citizens. That's really its main purpose. And you and others could convince us, no, you need to go change the research world. Start shaping what you do and the model towards that goal. But right now it isn't. And one big thing that's missed is that every model is appropriate to its purpose. So we really focused on one purpose and are leaving that research one aside. That said, people can use it that way, but that's not how we think of it.
Yeah, that is a very good thing. I have checked out that this simulator actually it has a very nice interface and all. You have done a great job, Andrew. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering my question. Thank you, Andrew.
Great. So I want to say thanks to Stephen and Harshdeep for coming up and chatting to us and asking your questions. Anybody else that's in the audience is more than welcome to raise your hand and come and ask Andrew a question or an observation that you want to make around this topic. Drew, I want to perhaps in conclusion of our conversation, I want to ask you, I know that you watch this space, and when I say this space, I mean the trajectory that we're on at the moment. I know you did a simulation using the En-ROADS model for the legislation that was recently passed in the US. But I want to just get a sense from you. What do you think is the likelihood of us taking this as urgently as we should in the foreseeable future?
Yeah. There's so much evidence that the scale of activity to address climate change and prevent it and deal with all of its impacts is just growing very fast. And some recent developments, two big areas of developments are the increased scale of the impacts showing up. I mentioned Pakistan, but I was out in Nevada in the West with the wildfires in the US, these hurricanes showing up. Like the impacts are here, people are taking it seriously. And secondly, here in the US, we have this Inflation Reduction Act that addresses climate change in the US for the first time. And no longer can inaction in the US be a reason that others around the world decide, well, the biggest emitter per capita, the US, is not acting, so we don't need to take action here in South America, here in Europe, here in China, here in Africa, like all around the world. So those two things are unleashing increased activity. We see it in the financial services industry with the growth of ESG, where the departments and corporations are finally having to think about climate. So I think the likelihood is very, very high, and we see it today. Oh, and here comes Denise Scar Del Monte. I might have said it wrong, but I'm guessing you want to send the mic over to her.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, Denise. If you could unmute and ask your question, or
Hi, everybody. Thank you. You can call me Scar.
Great.
I just wanted to add to something that Andrew said. I'm like in the middle of transitioning from a non-climate job to a climate job, ideally, or
Great.
at a company where I can contribute to climate action. And I just wanted to add to what Andrew was saying, because as I look through all of these job postings, and I keep finding more and more job boards for specifically for climate jobs, and also like venture capital profiles that are full of startups that deal with climate action or environmental degradation mitigation. So
Yes.
I'm really hopeful when I see all those job postings and the companies coming up trying to make an action. And I just wanted to throw that out there. Another thing, like my question was that there
Yeah.
is a datathon that just launched today, hosted by Open Earth Foundation, and I wanted to know how like if somebody could access the data provided by En-ROADS,
Yeah.
I see the data simulator, but I was wondering if somebody could like use that information from the model
Yeah.
to build one of these projects.
Oh, fantastic. Great. Yes, Denise. So I love these two topics. I'm going to speak to both. So many jobs opening up around the world. We have actually 2 posted, but there are 3 actually that we're thinking about. And I just put into the comments for this event the communications job that we now are hiring for. We also have the job, which is the director of technology and modeling. It is a more kind of niche job, but both of those are on our website. You're a software engineer and graphic designer. You might be a great fit. So please look at that. And anybody else out there, we are hiring and growing. When it comes to the Open Earth Datathon and the access to data, 2 things in En-ROADS. If you open it up and check it out, any graph, there's 3 dots in the top right corner. You click on those 3 dots, and there's a button that says copy data to clipboard. So all the data, all of the output for any scenario, you can just copy to clipboard, throw into Excel, make your own graphs. And we often share the API, the access to the code, so that you get the outputs from the model if you can put the inputs in. We've done it mostly with the media organizations. That is Axios, Bloomberg, New York Times have all built interactives using En-ROADS. So when there's somebody who can get our message out to the world, we give it to them. We've also sold that access to companies that want to create scenarios. In fact, I was just in Boston last week looking at the MIT Museum's version of En-ROADS. I don't know if you saw this, Peter, but in 2 weeks, It's going to be inducted into the MIT Museum to let people who visit there learn about something that grew out of research at MIT. So we love playing well with others in the data space, particularly when they have a big voice and they have a shared mission to tackle the climate crisis.
So I think this is a perfect opportunity for us to bring our conversation to a conclusion. Drew, I just want to say to you, thank you very much for putting aside your time. I know you're a busy man with what you have to do at Climate Interactive and coming here to have this conversation with us. What I'm going to mention to everybody that's here and been listening, we have recorded this, so we will make this available if you want to share it with others that you think will be, enjoy the conversation that we've had. But Drew, thank you very much again. And perhaps just one concluding comment from you before we end off.
I would say I've got two, and one of them is Peter. You're amazing and such an important part of this community and such a leader in climate literacy. Long may you thrive and do such great work. And thank you. And the other is to everybody. This is possible. We can bend the curve on this climate crisis. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. So let's all go for it.
Thank you, Drew. And I'm wishing everybody an awesome Wednesday for what's left of it for those of you, depending on which part of the world you are. And we will all chat to you all again soon. Thank you very much and goodbye.